Hello and welcome. Today I have on David Perrodin, PhD, and we're here to discuss his new book, School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America. Now, people who follow my channel realize I haven't done an interview in a long time, but this is one I have been looking forward to for a very long time, since David told me he was first working on this book back several months ago. And he was kind enough to send me a copy of it, and I read it last, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday night. It was enthralling. It's a great book. It's packed with information, but it is basically written for both the professional and the layman, which I thought was really great. So it definitely has mainstream appeal. But before we get into the book, I want to introduce David and let him tell you about himself instead of me telling you about him. So, David, thank you so much for coming on, and please tell our audience a bit about you. So go for it.
Yeah, John, thank you for having me on the show. And about me, so I'm a father of an elementary school student, middle school student. So right there, I have some vesting in school safety. And started years ago as a firefighter. Every organization that I've been in, they've kind of tapped me as the safety expert. So I worked in medical sector in schools. So I would help facilitate the drills, help people understand about safety. It was just an interest of mine. Things really kind of came together right around 2013. So I did a presentation on PBS about school safety, and people from all over the country were contacting me. And the reason I did it, 2012, December, the Sandy Hook shooting, Sandy Hook Elementary. And at that time, my oldest daughter was a first grader. So it was this connection of, wow, first grade, classroom being attacked, my youngest daughter being a first grader. And that was hard to emotionally deal with. I remember going to school after the shooting and wondering, should I be going, or, should I be leaving her school? Should I be going to work, or should I be staying home in case something happens? And just weird things, because I'm a safety expert. I know this is not at all probable in your school. And even if something happened, I'm not going to be able to rush in. So people started to contact me. Lawyers started to contact me. Hey, do you want to do some expert witness work? Yeah, sure. Why not? And I got to be pretty good at that. Then in 2016, a publisher contacted me, Roman and Littlefield, and said, we think you have a topic for a book. So I fleshed that out a little bit and came up with School of Errors, Rethinking School Safety in America, which is really a unconventional but very appropriate examination of the school safety industry, the industrial complex, and then the deep psychological processes that are kind of overtaking school safety right now. It's the number one topic in education. And
and also, I always think, news broadcasters in this sick way love it when there is one of these tragedies happen in a school, because they know everybody's going to tune in.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
yeah, absolutely. And I'm contacted by the media, but usually not as their protagonist, but as the antagonist, because everybody is for school fortification. At some level makes sense, but at the level that we're doing right now is just insane.
Yeah, we're gonna get into that. We're gonna get into that.
So I've kind of become.
Don't get ahead of me now.
I've become the media guy on that side. So yeah, I wrote the book. I had wonderful people to collaborate with to bring that all together. And it will be released on August 10th, although people can pre-order it now. And I think it actually might come out ahead of time. So, but you can go on, Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's available in ebook. It's available, in print copy. Down the road, we're hoping to have an audio copy of it. So I retired actually a couple of weeks ago. So I'm done. And if I hadn't retired, I actually don't think I could have written this book. I still consult with districts on largely the West Coast, big districts, and companies, which I can't name. But in order to speak the truth of this topic, you kind of have to remove yourself from it. So that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, I'm very jealous, by the way, that you got to retire and you're younger than I am. Which, David, that's just not fair. And I don't even have a wife and kids. It's not fair. It's really not. But no, congratulations, you deserve it.
Thanks.
But the interesting about you being retired, that is true. If you were, let's say, dependent financially on the school safety industrial complex, your finances would be injured by some of the things that you reveal in this book. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. And I teach a university class for superintendents. So it's a superintendent legal class, advanced legal class. And this fall, out of my 20 superintendents in this class, so last fall, we had this discussion, and they said, we realize that a lot of the fortifications that our boards are putting in, such as fences, those big yellow bollards in front of school surveillance cameras, that they're really not.
Yeah, and by the way, bollards, most people don't use that word. These are those big, ugly, like usually concrete, vertical pylons you see in front of things. Like, it kind of reminds me of the stuff you'd see in front of the American embassy in a
retail
country,
stuff like that. People don't smash through the front of the building. So you see them in front of retail stores and stuff like that. So they become really common in schools. But the superintendent said, Dave, if we don't go along with this, if we don't go along with our board saying this, it's probably the end of our jobs, because the board will just say, at the end of your contract, you're non-renewed, go on and have a good life. And they actually are honest with that discussion, saying, if I speak up against this, and you have to remember, a lot of schools, they're in small communities. So it might be 1,000 people in a community. In Wisconsin, we have 421 school districts. The majority of them have under 1,000 students. So
really, I had no idea. I'm sorry, I'm from New York, so it's hard for me to relate to that. I mean, I had 2,500 people in just my one school in my district.
Yeah. So some of the superintendents literally have, 100 students, K-12 in their entire district. Now, if they've moved there, with their family, and you start to go against the grain of the school board and the community on some of the safety rhetoric, it really is your job. So people are coerced to being quiet, and they'll say that in a classroom when nothing is being recorded, and they'll say it to me, or if I'm consulting with somebody, but they'll never say it publicly. So you're absolutely right. What I write in the book had to be timed at a point when it would release after I was done with employment, because otherwise I wouldn't be employed. It just wouldn't be popular to bring me in with the positions that are in the book, which are completely grounded in empirical science. They're true. They're not subject to the rhetoric, but it's not what people want to hear, John, but it's what people need to hear.
Yeah, I can attest to that. In David's book, there's 4 pages of references alone at the end of the book. If you're, the copy that you say, it's like, I was like, no, because I read I was enthralled by this book, well, so now, if it's okay, can we get into the meat of some of the things that you cover in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
right. Well, no, hold on. I got a question. Could you explain to our audience the relationship between Torus and bagels? This will make. I know this sounds really weird. We're talking about school safety, and by the way, Torus is spelled Torus, not Taur, not the bull. But go ahead, and it's not a real word from what I understand. But anyway, go ahead and take it away, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. So Torus. So the best way to think about school safety and to start this discussion with parents, with teachers, superintendents, and so forth. Just think of a bagel. So if you're in that bagel, you can expect that if you start at the top of the bagel, 12 o'clock, and you kind of work your way around the bagel all the way back to 12 o'clock. So basically, it's a self-similarity, meaning every day is kind of a circle for all of us. We start at one point, and at the end of the day, we kind of end up at the same point, which probably is back at our house. So, but there's always going to be things that are different during that travel. So as we go through our daily bagel, we encounter different traffic. Maybe the weather's a little bit different. Maybe we changed up our breakfast. So we had a bagel that morning instead of
no, we had cream cheese. We always have bagels, but this time we went with cream cheese. Yeah.
Cream cheese, yeah. So it's always different. And what people will say is things are the same. Things are the same. Today is the same as yesterday. Tomorrow will be the same. Well, no, nothing is ever the same. That's inaccurate. There's never sameness. There's similarity, but there's not sameness.
Mhm.
So when we talk about a bagel, like, we can have 10 bagels and someone can grab and say, well, it's all the same. Well, no, every bagel itself is different. So we go through the day and we have these little variances, and the mind is very proficient at getting us, it's very efficient, I should say, at tuning out things that really don't impact us. So if we're walking down the road and a transformer is humming up above, we're not going to pay much attention to that or something. But what's really happening right now with our bagels is people are just getting so locked into, for example, focus lock with phones, that they're not, this whole situational awareness of traveling through your bagel, it's like everything is being tuned out. So what I'm trying to do,
part of this, though, sorry to interrupt you, but part of this is an evolutionary strategy, because especially if you lived in a very densely populated area like New York City, and we're going to talk specifically about New York later on, specifically 9/11, that it is necessary to just maintain your sanity to get anything done, to filter out 99% of what's going on around you.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, 99.9% of the time, until there's a disaster, then you have to be more aware of your surroundings. But just going through your everyday, you can't do that. The human mind didn't evolve to do that.
Right. And if we look over time, just in the last 100 years, we'll talk about a roam zone. So in the last 100 years, the typical 8-year-old, 100 years ago, would be able to roam a 30-mile range. And that same 8-year-old today, 300 yards in any direction. That's the average. That's in United States, Great Britain. We're talking first world countries. So we've really narrowed down this roam zone too. So when we talk about the Torus and the bagel, we have a very, very tiny bagel that we're working with today versus a bagel that you would have had 2 hands on, a huge one 100 years ago. So we've really taken that opportunity away from kids to understand what their environment is, to explore it, to interact with their environment, because we've painted it as dangerous. It's dangerous to be out there. So we've taken it away. So we really have this small range that people are exploring. Kids are exploring, but it's also coming to what millennials, not having licenses, not wanting to go places, not wanting to go out on dates, not wanting to leave home. And we're just seeing people not explore the environment. Now you can have cyber exploration, through your phone tribe. That's definitely happening. But real world exploration has collapsed, and it's a big safety threat.
Yes, and you want to explain that it's a safety threat because, well, let me put it this way. Like, when I was reading your book, I noticed that you kind of broke school safety down this way. I don't know if it was a conscious thing, but there's the tactical level. That's the most like base hands-on thing. Then there's the strategic level, and then there's just kind of this kind of what we're talking about here, where it's just open mindset to the X factors. Would that be somewhat accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I wanted to also do in the book is I can pick up a safety book off a shelf, and it's typically going to lead you to a menu, very linear, of here's what to do to keep safe. So, there are certain things obviously to do to keep safe. That you check in through one entrance at a school, you have a buzzer so people know who's coming in and out of your building. Yeah, things like that. I get it. But there's also this rationale of why it's so important to, for example, teach kids to be aware of their environment, this interaction with their environment. What's different in your environment than what was different, what was there 5 minutes ago? And I have some activities, I talk about on how to do that. That's not new, actually. Stuff like that goes back to Sir Baden-Powell, who founded scouting in his book, 1908 book, Scouting Games. So we go, into this tactical, strategic, and then also this deep philosophical conceptual zone.
Yeah, you touch on, you mentioned chaos theory, but we don't want to scare people away by using that, but you break it down in the fun way,
Yeah, and actually, so chaos theory, Dr. Paul Rapp, head of military medicine, I watched him on Nova when I was in high school, and I was fascinated of watching this presentation because...
You geek. No, I'm teasing.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh my goodness. And then I found him, years later. And as I wrote the book, we communicated, and it would be funny, John, because I would put together maybe 70 pages of content in the book, and then I would have it specific to, chaos theory and some other simulated annealing, some things like that. But anyway, I'd send it to him, and then the next day he'd have like a full feedback critique. I like this. You might want to go in this direction. Whoa, like what else are you doing? Like, amazing.
Right.
It took me like this long just to send it to you. But yeah, so Paul Rapp, I'll never forget. This is back in 1989 chaos theory. They were showing the human heartbeat, and they had two screens, and one was a heartbeat, which one beat replicated to the second beat, replicated to third. So they were all the same. It would just be like copying and pasting beat after beat after beat. And then there was one where it was kind of all sketchy lined. And the question was, which one of these is a normal heartbeat? Well, of course, you're going to look at the one where every beat looks identical or similar and say, that's a normal heartbeat. And Dr. Rapp said, no, that's not. That's pathological. Like if you were to see that, that might be indicating someone is about to go into a seizure or something like that. He said, look at this other screen where it's all over the squiggly lines, and you break it down. I said, this is normal. And this actually looks like chaos, but this is normal. This is a normal functioning heart. And this confuses people because they expect it to look all pretty and whatever. And we have this whole conception of what is normal. Like they built Hoover Dam, and entire swimming pools of water, leak through it, every minute, a leak around or whatever, but that's a functional tolerance. So,
well, I don't know if they allow it anymore, but you used to be able to take the tour where you could see all that. But I think after 9/11, they shut all that down. But anyway, the leaks in Hoover Dam.
Oh yeah. I took the tour actually in June of 2001. So yeah, right before they did that. So I was able to see that. Yeah.
Yeah, but go ahead. But we continue on this. So the heartbeats, that people would say that what's normal is not, and vice versa.
So yeah, so we have this whole conception also in schools of what is normal. So what happens is it gets very linear. Schools in general are very linear. They teach math in a certain way. They teach science. They teach reading, and it is. So it's like teacher A, the inter-rater reliability is what they aim for. So teacher A is teaching the same style as teacher B and C and D. And part of it is because schools get graded on this. They get a report card issued to the school for how well your students did in math and reading, and that's made available to the public. So schools have an incentive to be very linear, but you cannot be very linear in school safety because schools crisis is unpredictable. The term force majeure or superior force, it's written into every legal contract saying, hey, if something so crazy happens that we haven't prepared for, a solar flare and suddenly half of our satellites have been fried, how are we going to deal with that? We're going to have to, Apollo 13, we're going to have to work the problem. But that's not the way schools think. They get very, very linear. For example, if an intruder comes in, this is exactly what the intruder will do. This is exactly what we will do to counter that. Well, what if somebody pulls a fire alarm and, there's a shooter waiting outside, which has happened, and students are leaving the building out of one, or out of a few exits, and you have a population dense area? Or what if it's a football game at night where you have 2,000 people in a stadium? Every Friday night in Wisconsin, that's what it is in fall.
Yeah, Friday Night Lights, yeah.
Yeah, and across from where the seats are, typically that's just a fence or a woods or something like that. I mean, that's the way it is 2 blocks from my house. So people get extremely linear, and I needed to really aggressively go after that in the book of saying, knock it off. We need to definitely instruct situational awareness, identifying threats. This it's called an uncanny valley. It's when you recognize something isn't quite right. That's a skill that has eroded just kind of in general over time, as you've said, but it's eroded with focus lock. All the videos of people walking down the street and they walk right into a signpost or right through traffic.
Did you see the one in the mall where This is just a quick aside where the woman, she has her nose buried in her smartphone, and she falls into the fountain in the mall. I mean, literally, like head over heels into the fountain. Like,
I have seen it. So we have these types of things going on, and no one's recognizing it. No one's having the discussion of, even we put these elaborate, sophisticated systems in place. And I refer to these, some of these school systems as the meteor approach. Like a meteor from the sky.
mm,
So you can put together these systems. You're going to shoot meteors out of the sky, or you're going to launch things that'll land on meteors. Well, they're all great because you never will probably have to test them ever. So you can just theorize of it will do the job. And if it doesn't, well, then someone else, the consequences are going to be someone else is going to be left holding the bag. So it's so frustrating for me to observe, one, all of this money that's going into fortifications, which have not been proven to be effective. Here, and the other part is, we know that the kids are suffering, not suffering, but they're engaged right now in focus lock. They're not tuning into their environments, environmental awareness. A huge statistic, 81% of the time, this is confirmed by Secret Service, National Threat Assessment Group, FBI, so on, that 80% of the time during a school shooting, the school shooter had told at least one person that they intended to bring harm onto the school.
Yeah, 81%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I? I'm going to read something. This is on the jacket of the book. It is a quote regarding your book by Rory Miller. He's author of Meditations on Violence, and this is what he says about your book. If you have any interest in saving kids' lives, you need this book. It's not a regurgitation of the hide, run, fight mantra, but a deeper study of what humans do in chaotic, unpredictable emergencies and how to apply those lessons. We say that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. In real life, that means it is cheaper, easier, and more effective to spot troubled students than to spend millions on security bling, quote unquote, that we already know doesn't work. Better to cultivate a principle-based, flexible attitude than memorize a dozen rigid, impossibly specific responses that only work in the unlikely event that your chaos matches a previous chaos. David Perrodin gives you a way to think about the problem and an insight into how the humans you deal with are probably going to handle it anyway, so you can work with nature instead of trying to script the unpredictable, unquote. I thought that sums up your book very well.
Yeah. And Rory, let me tell you about Rory Miller. So Rory Miller is the world's top expert on prison security, and he travels the world working with maximum security prisons. And I believe he is in Australia right now. And Rory and I spoke a lot as I developed the book. So I have much respect for his work. And it was really an honor for him to review the book and to give that endorsement back to me. But one of the things he said to me too is, he said, Dave, everybody has a plan, right? So Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And that was his thing. He said, when I deal with prison guards, the new prison guards, it takes them about 3 to 5 seconds to realize that they are actually being assaulted by one or more prisoners, until it actually kicks in their mind of this is happening. So what he does is he works to make that so it's almost an instant. First of all, that they're much more perceptive of what's happening in their environment ahead of time, that they can evade this. But if it happens, that they can instantly cut down that 3 to 5 seconds into an immediate response.
Mm.
So he's a fascinating guy.
Yeah, and I thought that his quote about your book was just brilliant and spot on. I mean, after reading it, I was like, wow, this guy totally understands it. Obviously, he had some influence on your thinking when you were writing this book. Now, if it's okay, we're going to jump around a little bit, because we're not going to go through the whole book, chapter by chapter. And actually, you broke it down into sections. It's not all just chapters. I mean, how many, was it 3 or 4 sections you have the book broken into?
It's 5 sections and 30 chapters, but the book is 177 pages. So actually, as you said, it's maybe 1 or 2 nights you can get through it. And it's funny, John, because like I've read it so many times. And every time I read it, I still really enjoy it. Like I'll just get into it, and I can start to see how the connections come back and forth. I mean, there was so much time put into, I believe, getting this book right. And then I gave this book to member checks, people in the field, and I said, I rip it apart. Tell me if I'm on the mark or not. Not so much, whether it's grammar, spelling, yeah, stuff like that I get. But am I accurate with the message I'm trying to get across? And some of the folks were people not necessarily aligned with me, but people that I respected. And I needed to hold the book to that high of a threshold. And then also the people that I worked with to help inform the book, Dr. Paul Rapp, Ann Sturzinger. So Ann Sturzinger, a brilliant author. But
Ann Sturzinger, she's a brilliant author and editor. I've had her on my show.
Editor, yeah, completely. So Ann comes in, and I contact Ann, and I said, Ann, you don't know this topic, and I want this to be, I want the skepticism to come out. I want the nihilism to come out, because everybody that addresses it in a way not to offend somebody, because like you said, they have to maintain their job. I mean, if you're 35 and this is your first book, it's your last book. You're not writing a sequel. It's full of errors. I mean, and you're done. You're not, I mean, it is crazy. So Ann came in, and one of the things right away Ann did was brought that nihilistic perspective in a very professional manner. But she would say, let's go sharper right here. And let's also bring in a timeline that gets people thinking about how humans function. Not only, everybody talks about school safety as Columbine was the start of school safety, the 1999. And
that's 20 years ago now for people. Can you believe it? 20 years.
Yeah. And one of my good friends is his daughter was shot and paralyzed at Columbine. We talk on a regular basis.
That's awful.
Yeah. Yeah. So people kind of go back that far, and Anne helped take the book all the way back, like 500 years. So we're talking about Thomas Hobbes and talking about the social contract in England during the civil wars and things like that, and really how there's pieces of that show through in school safety. And as I was just thinking about this today and reflecting upon, as Anne helped bring that forward, what we're seeing with this massive funding toward fortification might be a way to build in this social contract where Americans believe they can't look internal for the answers. They have to look external. They have to look to the government. Hey, give us money for school safety. And that's kind of what's happening. The schools aren't solving this themselves. They're going to the government. And the government isn't solving this. We can get into that. There are no solutions being provided. There's money being provided. It reminds me a lot, John, of when I grew up during the Reagan administration, and we had the Star Wars initiative, and the Soviets were the antagonists. So we always had this boogeyman out there. So you would, pay your taxes. You would go along with what the government was saying. Yeah, SDI, yeah, strategic defense initiative, sure.
It's so nice to talk to someone that actually remembers Ronald Reagan, because I'm so old that most people don't. But yeah, no, I remember all that. The quote unquote evil empire. Do you remember when he gave that speech?
I absolutely do. And it wasn't just that. It was the media. Rocky IV came out, and of course it was Rocky versus. But we saw
Ivan Drago.
Drago. I mean, who? And if that wasn't. Clearly conveying that the Soviet Union was the antagonist. And we saw it, Sting in the song, I Hope the Russians Sold Their Children Too. So anyway,
I hope was it Hope the Russians or I Hope Reagan? I think you said both. Yeah, Sting. I remember that song. Yeah.
1983, CBS had the TV movie The Day After, which was watched by 100 million people.
Oh yeah, that movie gave me nightmares. I was like 13 when I saw it.
You can watch it online now, and every once in a while I'll bring it up, and to this day it just terrifies me as they break in on the TV with the warnings and the sirens start, and it's terrible.
I didn't have no idea what an EMP was. That was the first time I saw an EMP depicted on television. Like I said, we're going back to 1983, where all the electrical systems of all the cars get fried.
Yeah.
Everybody's stuck on the highway. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah. I think that also happened to my 1988 Dodge LeBaron anytime the temperature dropped under 40 degrees.
For different reasons of physics, but yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
it
right.
had some sort of EMP, but you're right. So that was happening, and I think what's happening right now, I'm trying to make sense. This is so crazy. I've never seen this before. I've been in this industry, I guess we'd say industry, but I've been in this field for 20 years. And in the last 2, 3 years, this massive push of money and bills. So, John, since Sandy Hook, okay, 2002. So from 2002 to now, we've been averaging about 400 bills proposed by the states per year for school safety. And,
Jesus.
and of those, about 80 pass, so about 20% pass. Most of those are bills that have some kind of funding for fortifications, and others are for like arm. If you go, if you just go southern U.S., it gets to arming teachers. That's exactly how that looks when you start to plot it out. But these bills are intense, and this year through January alone, or no, January to April, we had over 250. So we're going to set a record this year for schools, quote unquote, safety bills. But what does safety mean? So the safety fortifications, well, that's where most of the money goes. And they're saying student mental health. But we also know there isn't a profile of a school shooter that some students were on the A honor roll. They were in sports. They were liked by their peers. So this whole thing of, there's a profile that doesn't exist. So, but money isn't going where it needs to go. One is in threat detection. We talked about 81% of the time somebody else knows and they're not reporting it. So if you can cut that in half, boom, half your school shootings are gone. Your threat reporting systems, a lot of kids can't access them. They're really complicated, like these apps. I try a lot of these things out. I'm like, I have no idea how to like make a report that I was bullied or that one of my friends said he was going to shoot up the school or something like that. I mean, these apps get really complicated. And the reason is, John, you don't have to test any of these things. There isn't a law that says you have to put anything through beta trial testing. So it's conceived and it is marketed, and that happens within months.
Yeah, well, so basically, once it's implemented, that's the test. It's implemented, and then you can see how it is. You can judge it, after the implementation. You can see, is this working? Are we getting valuable feedback? What are the pros and cons? How can we change it? You know what I mean? Like, just
Right.
if that's making sense at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Oh, and it kind of goes through like at least beta sites. Maybe you're going to try it at one or two places to see how it works. But then, but people, they're not doing that. They're putting these things, they're immediately manufacturing them and putting them out there. And what they'll tell me, so I'll ask, and they're under no obligation to show me research, but I'll say, I'm inquiring about your product and I want to know research. And what they'll always provide me is, here's how many schools use it. And it's great. It's all color coded. It's graphs and maps and really cool stuff. And I'm like, this is a saturation chart. And they'll say like, in they're worth, whatever. And I'll be like, but this isn't research. This isn't testing. And what are you learning from this? How is this making schools safer? I guess that's my question. Like, is it, and really, what's changed? I mean, we still have school shootings. That's not changed. We still have suicide rates for adolescents are at the highest they've ever been. They're up 30% in the last 5 years. So what is changing? I mean, we're throwing all of this money, all of these products and apps and all of that, and
things are getting worse.
And things are getting worse. So that's where I come in with the book of trying to underlie and say, we got to look at some really big fundamental root cause systematic things here. And then I don't give answers in the book. I don't say on the last page, here are the 7 things you do and you're guaranteed to have a safe school. But I clearly
no, because that's the trap of what you are fighting against. But you do give examples. Now, let me set this up, because this I think I mentioned to you privately whether this is a story that has personal meaning for me. If you were to ask people, what was the largest sea-based evacuation in human history, what would 99.99 people answer that question with?
Dunkirk.
Dunkirk, right? So those who don't know, or the 0.001 people don't know, Dunkirk was the evacuation of approximately 339,000 British and French soldiers from France to mainland Britain in the spring of 1940, when they were escaping the Nazi invasion. And I believe that evacuation took place over a little under 9 days.
Yes.
Now, could you tell us about the actual largest sea evacuation in human history?
Yeah, absolutely. It was New York Harbor on September 11th, 2001. So largely centered at Battery Park, close to the World Trade Center. 500,000 people were evacuated from Lower Manhattan in 9 hours by boat. And
that is incredible.
Absolutely incredible. No fatalities. Nothing as far as any significant injuries, no lawsuits, no crashes, nothing. And the part to remember too on this, John, is this 9/11 in New York was still a very dynamic situation through those 9 hours, because all of the towers, including Tower 6 or Tower 7 didn't collapse. Yeah, 7 collapsed later. People were not sure if the harbor was mined. So this wasn't like, for example, the Murrah bombing, which happened in 95.
95, yeah.
Yeah. So Oklahoma City, the Murrah bombing, I mean, it happened and it was done. I mean, it was catastrophic, but there wasn't the thought that there were going to be successive bombings or that other areas were at risk. So this
just for background for those who might be sketchy on that, it wasn't just New York that was attacked. The Pentagon was also attacked. There was also the other plane that went down in Pennsylvania. I forget where. So, and all this was coming in. So they thought the entire country was attacked. So the situation was, shall we say, extremely fluid.
Yeah, absolutely. So people, so what happens? So this is an absolutely fascinating story. And it's a fascinating story too, because it completely crashes into organizational theorists, like Russell Ackoff. So Russell Ackoff for years had preached and said you could never take components of different vehicles and put them together to make an ideal vehicle. So let's just break that down a second. You couldn't take like the engine from Mercedes, the tires from a Ford, the exhaust from a Nissan, and so forth, and put those together and have some kind of functioning, like, efficient vehicle. He said just wouldn't work. The fact is, though, that's exactly what happened in that harbor rescue. It started with Admiral Loy, Coast Guard Admiral Loy. So Loy sent out an order, and he said, hey, anybody that has a boat, if you can contribute to this, help out bring assets, such as water, food, if you can transport people, whatever, you figure it out. Like, if you can help out, get down here and work the problem. Okay, that's all he said. That's all he said. So right away, like, you were thinking, how do we do this? Like, how does this all come together? How do the boats line up? And
no checklists, no checklists. Protocol, follow this, no.
Yeah, which is every school building, it's 3-ring binders of here's how to do whatever. It's by the door as you come into the room, like the 13 things. Here's what to do if there's a fire, a bomb threat, and whatever, all of those things. No protocol. But it reminds me of Apollo 13 too. It's again, this whole thing of working a problem. So we have roughly 150 boats respond. About a third of those are tugs, but some are sightseeing boats. Some are ferries.
Party boats, yachts,
There were yachts. There were construction boats. There were a handful of Coast Guard boats, fire boats, and things, but that was a very minor part. So what happens is people just figure this out. They figure out how they need to line up. Battery Park at that time was not made to have major mooring, meaning that you could just bring your boat up and people could walk off from Battery Park right onto the boat.
For those who don't know, that's the ferry system. Basically, the Battery Park port is basically just used for ferrying back and forth.
Yeah.
Like from, was it Long Island? I'm sorry. Where does Avaro's? Staten Island.
Yes.
Back and forth. I can't believe it. So it's not where people own yachts more than their boats. But anyway, please keep going.
Oh yeah. So what people were doing is they were improvising. They're ripping doors out of the boats and using them as gangplanks. And they would take bed sheets and they would tie them up on the side of the boat and use spray paint and put Hoboken. So they were
I saw that there was spray painting on the side of the boat, the destination. They're literally taking cans of spray paint and then writing down where this one's going. Yeah, great.
So from an organizational theorist standpoint, this doesn't make any sense. Although there are numerous books that are written about how this was how the organizational theory completely applied and all of that. It's like, no, it didn't, because at no point was this ever a system that was designed to incorporate, a tugboat and a rescue fireboat and police boat and a yacht and all of that. Never. And this had never been practiced. And how this came together, how people knew how to interface with this system. So part of what happens, honestly, in all sentinel events, all disasters like this, is systems will develop. You just have to let them. And that's a hard thing for people to accept, but it's true. Systems will develop. And so systems will develop. You interface with it. There's a little bit of pareidolia that happened, I believe, in this also, where people were coming to the harbor expecting that there would be a rescue force. So when the boats were there, they almost, psychologically manifested that. But also you had this whole process of legacy knowledge, which is not present in schools. So let me talk about that. So, when you would pull up like McAllister Towing, for example, they had been in the harbor for 300 years. So, I mean, their family crest was a tugboat. I mean, they had been there forever. So you had all of this knowledge in these captains and in these crews. So they could figure it out. I mean, they had been there when it had been choppy, when it had been sleeting at night and all different conditions. So they figured out how to make this work. And it's completely amazing because 9 hours later, the system just dissolved. It wasn't needed anymore. It accomplished what it needed to accomplish, and it dissolved. And there wasn't an after action report. There wasn't getting everybody to sit down and say, okay, how did it go? How do we do it better next time? What would be the recommendations? I mean, those things, again, those are all important, I guess, in drills. But the whole part of this is saying we don't give enough credit that, one, we'll be able to work the problem, and two, that people inherently have tacit knowledge to figure out how to interface during crisis situations. We can go and look at, I've looked at many through history. Operation Frequent Wind, the evacuation of Saigon, is another perfect example. So many people were coming out to the boats that were rescuing them. The military craft that the order was given, just push the choppers right off the deck, right?
Yeah, you can see video of that.
Yeah. Everybody involved in that received 3 separate accommodations for thinking, basically thinking in the moment. Nobody was punished. It was the right thing to do. But that's not what happens in schools. This whole concept of this 500,000 people in 9 hours and the system develops. That's not the way that schools think. They try to create binders and binders and binders and rehearsals for every step of this, not knowing of, as technology advances, what could happen next. I mean, what if it was a solar flare? And if we had a 9/11 today, how would it be different? Well, it'd be different because on 9/11, cell phones were still in their infancy. We had texting. We didn't have smartphones in 2001. Today, 57% of the world uses phones. During 9/11, it was about 30%. 5 years before that, 6 years of the Murr building, it was about 12%. So it's really strange that people aren't recognizing this. They're moving toward this massive fortification in schools and not toward the helping kids with situational awareness. And what if something goes wrong? How would we work through that? So,
well, what do you think because I think this book is really good, obviously, for school administrators and people in any kind of line of work like that. But let's be honest, a lot of people who are going to be reading this book are going to be, parents. What do you think they can take away from this?
A few things. One is if you know what is probably going to happen, like so if there is, and everyone thinks about a school intruder, but since 2007, I think either 12 or 15 students have died in tornadoes across the country. I mean, there are many different things that can happen, wildfires, things like that. But if parents know what to expect ahead of time, so they're reading the book and they're understanding, okay, this is likely what the school is going to go through as far as like an evacuation, notifying people, also that rescuers are going to be coming to the school. So it's going to be hard to get to the school. As a parent, you really shouldn't go to the school unless you're directed. And you're never going to be directed to come to a school. It would be a different location, like a reunification site. Once you tell people ahead of time kind of what to expect, what's going to happen, they handle it really well. And when I consult with school districts also, I share that part, which is in the book, of saying, this is likely what's going to happen in a large scale event. And this is what your part is going to be in it, or this is what you're going to see. So that's a benefit. The other part, or another part is just don't accept what your school, I guess, tells you for this is what we're doing to make the school safer. Ask questions. What are the learning objectives? Like how is this making the school safer? And we've just bought this, but where's this been put in place and the research behind it? I mean, it's not going to make you popular, but and how does this specifically benefit my child? That's a great question. And
well, can we talk about? I don't know if you want to give specific examples, but well, where is the most money being wasted, or what specific? I think when you talk a lot about the fortification process, quote unquote,
right?
Do you think that is really where money is being really wasted? Because we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry now. I mean, and it keeps growing.
Yeah. It completely is. It completely is. So just in the last week in Oklahoma, a school district administrator purchased. Think of an igloo, okay, but like a bulletproof igloo. So not your typical igloo. So and so has this bulletproof igloo which can be permanently assembled in a classroom and can accommodate up to 30 people. So there's a video on YouTube of him inside of this igloo, and he tested by having sharpshooters fire 9mm, in different weapons, at this device while he's inside of it. And then he comes out and he's talking about what a rush it was, and wow, they really went to town. And you proved it to me, like, I need this. We got to put these. So he bought 7 at $30,000 a piece and put them in his school district.
Jesus.
And I'm like, so you can just see the craziness. But I think, and I used to do the high intensity entrance drills. So there's a picture of me in the book where I have a 9mm gun in a bulletproof vest, a helmet, and I'm next to a squad car. I mean, I was doing all of that stuff and I loved it, and it's adrenaline. And I think that's part of the whole thing that comes into play here too, with these hyper realistic drills and like that superintendent. I mean, who in the world would think that that's a good idea to go inside of the structure and, well, if he didn't make it out, we're not going to buy it. So he comes out in this whole thing of, now I've proven it. And so you have $210,000. But they've also rebadged it as the intruder shelter / tornado shelter. But you've had tornadoes, forever, and you haven't done anything about it. And new construction in places like Oklahoma have to have tornado safe areas
Right.
to withstand the E5. But so you have these absolutely crazy things. Window film. This is a huge one, John. They call it either bullet resistive or bullet deterrent window film, and they put it all over the glass and saying, it's harder to get through. Well, yeah. So the point is that is actually an accurate statement. If you do put that on glass, it is harder to break through it. It's also harder for sharpshooters in rare instances to shoot into a building, but
to take out
a shooter. Yeah. But it also knocks down the lumens or the light inside of the building. Now, why is that important? because the Hashong Mahone group did a study out on the West Coast in thousands of classrooms over a number of years and strongly indicated that the more sunlight, natural sunlight that gets into classrooms, the higher the academic performance was of students, and also the less instances of negative behavior by students. So basically saying we get students more sunlight, they're going to perform better in school, academically and socially. So right there, we have a contradiction, right? That doesn't make sense. So anyway, all of this stuff gets sold. Bulletproof that, bulletproof this, fences.
One of my favorites is the bulletproof whiteboard.
Oh my God.
You want to tell what that is?
I had that in my 2013 PBS presentation, and it came out like a week before. And up on the screen, I had a picture of the superintendent, and he's all happy. And this police officer just unloaded on this whiteboard in front of, like an entire auditorium full of parents, like demonstrating that this thing could withstand. So you'd have to get this off of the wall. It would detach, and then you could hide behind it. And now there's bulletproof backpacks. I mean, that's a thing. I talked to a guy who sells these things, and he said after Parkland, the last 4 that he had in his store sold that afternoon. So, and hundreds of dollars. And I get companies approaching me all the time. Dave, would you be interested in endorsing our product? And we have this and that and that. And I don't endorse anything, but I get approached.
Well, you're certainly not going to endorse that. I mean, even back before you retired, you were going to be like, no, I'm not doing that.
So you come up with these absolutely crazy things. And the part 2 is like, so if it is an intruder, for one, you have 8 minutes usually between the onset of the event and the conclusion of the event. So you'd have to have all of the pieces correctly in place for this to work. The students to be in the right place, the teachers to be in the right place, these things to come off, that attacker, or what if there's multiple attackers? It doesn't account for things like, well, what if kids are out on a playground or something like this? I mean, it's very narrow thinking. And these are the same schools who will say, we don't have money for additional teachers or books or things like that. So it really becomes
but they'll spend like hundreds of thousands of dollars on igloos, for God's sake.
Yeah. And I can tell you why that happens. So it's house money. I mean, it's house money, John. It's house money, because we talk about these bills that are out right now for school safety. So we're getting hundreds of millions and billions. The number is $3 billion. That's kind of the consensus billion on the number that's been put out there for school safety. $3 billion. That's low, because referendums allow for safety upgrades. So a lot of things that probably should have been done in schools. The average school in the US is 44 years old. So, we should have been replacing these doors. We should have been replacing these windows. Well, let's just roll it into this referendum and call it safety. We're going to put in, whatever, and it goes. So the number is probably closer to 5 billion, and it's growing. Every year, the number grows. It's taxpayer money. So nobody is accountable. School administrators last about 2 years in their position. School board members turn over, about the same amount of time. Students don't stay in districts that long. Parents aren't staying that long. So of course, they're voting it in. It's house money. It's coming from grants. And if it ups their, tax bill, maybe they moved on by that time. But right now it is all coming largely through these grants. It's not sustainable. I looked at last year, I think there were like 39,000 vehicle deaths in the United States. So vehicle related fatalities. I mean, if I came out and said, listen, I know a way that we could save 25,000 lives, and I can give you the exact plan on how to do it. 25,000 lives a year. And okay, what are we going to do? All right, we're going to redesign every car. So we have a bumper all the way around the entire car, and it's only going to be, it'll be 25 miles an hour, and we're going to do, so we're going to widen all of our roads. So like all of these things, and that would actually produce this. We know that this would reduce by 25,000 people would be saved a year. But would we do it? No, we wouldn't do it, because I'd come to you and say, John, this is great. And also it's going to double your taxes. in order to do this. There's
Well,
some
and also, there's no way I'm going to state a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. But
right. So there's always these give and takes, and the thing with with schools is, at what point do we make schools into prisons? And also we think even prisons, people are able to bring things in and out of prisons. So it's very unnatural. We're not helping kids. And I talk about this in the book, but for example, like a group of 8th grade parents got together and canceled the traditional 8th grade field trip because suddenly it was too dangerous to go to Washington, D.C. because of potential terrorist attacks. And there were not any alerts out of, don't travel at this time, but the parents have just decided we're not going to do it. It's too dangerous. Statistically, that was inaccurate because for example, just taking a trip to Cleveland, which was close by, more dangerous than Washington, D.C. during the day, observing the monuments and White House, Smithsonian, all of that. But
yeah, and especially the places they're going to go to have a very high
yeah, they do.
presence,
Yeah, and actually there's a system in place where you contact ahead of time, and there's a liaison which interfaces with your school that you meet with. This is so common. But yeah, so that experience was denied. So what have you just communicated to your 8th graders, your 13-year-olds? You've just said, hey, the world's too dangerous and we have to protect you. So they're, downstairs, drinking Mountain Dew, playing video games. They're allowed to go 300 yards to the end of their street to get some pizza and come back. It's horrible. I mean, so we talk about the shrinking torus. And at the same time, the parents are coming into the school board of saying, yeah, I want to see the fence and I want the surveillance cameras. Yeah, let's go for it. It's going to cost what? I don't care. And here's the deal. It's in marketing. So in marketing, John, it's called customer perceived value, CPV, customer perceived values. So they're trying to sell you, this is how this will benefit you. Now, when the narrative from a vendor is, and first of all, you can be a school safety expert without any credentials, no registration, no license, no course, nothing. So I'm a school safety expert. I have been vetted by the court system as an expert witness. So that will be my credential, and I'll put that up against anybody's. But
well, your PhD, your doctorate also.
Yeah, I studied this. I studied under fellowship for 2 years, military, healthcare and education. But when you make the argument of customer perceived value, and someone says this makes your school safer, this makes your kids safer, don't you want to make your kids safer? I mean, how do you respond to that? Of course, everybody's it's playing at the emotions. You're getting people in a weakened emotional state, and they're going to say, "Yeah, do it." And I always hear this: if it happened in one place, it can happen here. That's called projected benchmarking, a term I came up with. I put in the book, so I hope nobody copies it. But projected benchmarking, it happened in one place, it can happen here. Well, yeah, I mean, you could say that for anything. So people are using these emotional ploys. And I've worked with school districts. I've been brought in as a consultant, and that is, they're convinced if it happened one place in one time, it will replicate exactly that way in their district. In meantime, they don't have a system for how their kids can report threats other than maybe tell an adult, or I'll pull their handbook, something real simple, John. I'll pull their handbook and say, here, I just ran it through a readability level in your 6th grade handbook, and the readability is 12th grade. So like the kids aren't even understanding what this means, which are all easy fixes that you don't have to spend billions of dollars on. But yeah, you talk about that igloo thing. I mean, some of this stuff I can't even imagine I'm seeing. Like, I thought it was crazy 5 years ago to see some of the camera systems come up in some of the apps.
Oh, can we talk about that? Sorry to interrupt, but it just sparked my memory now. You talk about comms, the importance of comms in school safety, how that is being overlooked, but they're putting the cameras everywhere, but they have no way of communicating with people.
Oh, yeah. You're talking like, like the two-way radio systems?
Yes.
Or?
Yeah, communications, comms, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I had a thorough interview with Fred Varian back in 2013. Fred Varian has been the expert in communications for the last 40 years, has worked with the Super Bowls, worked with the NFL, with different, military intelligence and so forth. But we talked about communication systems. And a lot of these schools, John, first of all, the 2A radios, they still have some that are analog, which, they haven't sold those since 2009, some analog, some digital. They have radio systems that can't communicate from one building, from one side of the building to another, because they're not getting through the cement and the steel.
Right.
They communicate building to building. So the communication systems are typically horrible.
Well, that's one of the things that they learned from 9/11 was the fact of coordinating between the different first responders. There was no central command. So let's say the FDNY couldn't communicate to the NYPD or the ambulances, etc. There was no centralized command. That's one of and I believe they did implement plans to deal with that. But anyway, please keep going.
Oh yeah. So communication systems in schools, and also communication systems, I see this in new buildings, just the intercom system. So if you're announcing a drill, like we are going into a lockout or a lockdown. A lockout is when you lock the doors and people aren't coming in and out, but you continue to go class to class. This actually happens at Columbine High School right now on a regular basis. For example, 150 people a month try to access the campus. As crazy as that is, but it's become this destination. So they lock out. They don't go to lockout. So lockout or lockdown. But I'll be in buildings and they'll do, announcement of a intruder drill, and 30% of the building never heard it because the building's 44 years old. The intercom doesn't work there. It doesn't work in the gym. It's just like, what did they say? I didn't get it.
It's like Charlie Brown's teacher.
Yeah. Jason, you just got called to the office. Oh no, not again. So it's these fundamental things of like just communicating that you are going into a lockdown, or that you do have an intruder in the building, or that there's a tornado watch or whatever. I mean, so communications. But people never think about that. And why? Because school safety has to be something that parents in the community can see. That's what it's all about. That's what the superintendents tell me. I know that's where the vendors are going. That's why those big, yellow, ugly metal bollards in front of buildings stuck down in the sidewalks so cars can't smash into the schools, which doesn't happen anyway. That's why those are there. That's why you can see the cameras outside and in the films of a little tinted glass and stuff like that. That's why all of that stuff is there. And these big theatrical drills where you're bringing in once a year, the fire and ambulance and the chopper, and you're getting kids. Happened 2 days ago at my kids' elementary school, 2 blocks from my house. They blocked off my street so they could bring in, all the fire engines and police and EMS.
Emergency services, yeah.
Yeah. So, I wasn't for it because, one, you run that drill every year. We're in Wisconsin where we have tornadoes. It wasn't, it was 20 years ago, Barneville, Wisconsin, not too far from where I'm at, had an EF5 hit during the night, destroyed 90% of the town. So, we could vary this up a little bit. You could accomplish your same objectives, but that's the question. What are your objectives? Are your objectives to test your communication system? You're running through a building, firing off rounds, trying to, make it seem like there's an intruder. You're getting people painted up with, fake gunshots and stuff like that. Well, that's drama. That's drilled drama, but that's what people want to see. They put it in the paper. They invite people to participate. Hey, anybody, you can role play. And that's what they did. So
people just LARPing, basically, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes them feel important, and it's a powerful, fascinating experience. But what are your learning objectives? There's an officer out of Florida who I've connected with. His name is Bart Barta. His son has autism. He trains other officers on how to respond to schools in emergency situations, whether it be, an intruder or also like a medical emergency. A student has a broken leg or a seizure, how to respond, and also how to interact with students that might have autism, for example, or special needs. Also worked with James Sibley, an attorney out of San Jose. His son has autism, and he told me, Dave, and I did a podcast with him. He said, well, having my son in Boy Scouts, and I was actually one of the scout, commanders. He was telling me the story was so beneficial. And we would put all these scenarios together, like, someone, sprained their ankle on a trail. What are we going to do? And they had a real scenario happen where the area was flooding. So they knew that this one bridge that they had come in over was going to be flooded out. So then they had to handle it of how they were going to do this. But he said, my son handled that well because we had practiced it. So this is something too, where I would say this activity happened 2 days ago. I haven't seen anything in the paper of what were the learning objectives? What were we trying to learn? And also this, like how the layout of the school, how different agencies interface, how our incident command, who takes the lead, how we stage our assets, what's the best place, a reunification site, how we set that up. None of that. So there's this amazing technology out there. It's called What 3 Words. It's an app, What 3 Words. And get this. So like the guys that created this out in London in 2013, musicians. They would go to big gigs like the Pfizer Forum in Milwaukee or something like that, or whatever, Target Center. They go to these big venues and it only had like an address. So I'd be like, where are we supposed to bring our gear? Like, this is an address. And think about it, like a Google map, if somebody lives on 100-acre farm, it gives like one address. It doesn't say like, here's exactly where on the farm.
Yeah, well, yeah, like someone says, meet me at Yankee Stadium.
Right. That's exactly what this was. Okay, we're here. Like, so what 3? So Chris Sedgwick is the founder, and I talked to the chief marketing officer, Giles. I had him on my show, and I said, well, tell me about this technology, because it's worked its way into the safety world. It's used in the Netherlands. It's used in Sweden. The United Nations uses it. Actually, Ford Motor Company now has it as their GPS system. You'll start to see business cards with 3-word addressing. So it'll give an actual 3 words like banana, steps, and mirror. That could be where I'm sitting right now. That would be this, and it will always be this, no matter what's here in 20 years, if this building's here or not. That's a 3-word address. So 3-word, this geo addressing, which is like a $100 billion industry. You're talking about schools at $3 billion, because we think about transportation, logistics, getting your products, from one place to another, postal service, stuff like that. So they came up with this system. It's amazing. So they used it in the last couple Super Bowls. It wasn't publicly announced that it was used in the Super Bowls, but it basically took the entire world and broke it down into 3-meter by 3-meter squares. So that is so helpful, but schools don't interface.
It's so brilliant, but so simple. It's I just love that. Keep going, please.
Oh yeah. And so I contacted them, and I looked at the software, and I said, yeah, like this would completely be appropriate for school safety. So we had this discussion, and this wasn't a paid consultation or anything. I just saw the potential, and I said, here's what happens. Schools put together ahead of time. This is where our evacuation site is going to be. This building, this church, 2 blocks away, everybody's going to go down there. And nobody has the keys for this place anyway, because like it's been 4 administrators ago since anyone's ever even confirmed that has been the evacuation site. But let's just say it's the church 2 blocks away. And also, here's our reunification site. It's also the church, or it's like this municipal center, whatever. Well, you don't know that because perimeters have been increasing. Perimeters used to be about, 200-300 yards around a site, and now they can be up to a half mile. And they're doing that because parents rush into sites, reporters rush into sites, people pick these things up on scanners, and they flood the areas. And you can't get assets such as your emergency responders into those areas. So they push the perimeters out. So what happens if your perimeter all of a sudden is larger than where your evacuation site is? Meaning your evacuation site is within your perimeter. You can't go there. You have to go somewhere else. So how do you do this in the moment? How do you do this when you've told everybody, it's in every binder, everybody has it locked in, every parent? So I said, don't do it. Like, here's the plan. And I'm writing a white paper on this right now, and I'm going to be presenting at a conference on this. But I said, this is one of those work the moment things. This is 9/11. This is the harbor. This is saying, we'll solve this in the moment. When the police respond, when all the emergency services are there, the instant command system, they'll say, here's the perimeter that we need to establish. And then outside of this perimeter, here's the site we're going to identify for evacuation. Here's where we're going to take everybody. So now you can identify that site in what 3 words? And again, vehicles will have this. Ford Motor Company will have this in all vehicles next year. It's being implemented right now. Mercedes-Benz already has this in all their vehicles. This will be across the United States within the next 3 to 5 years, every system, 3-word addressing, also easier to memorize. But what you do then is dynamic. You can say, this is where you're going to be. And maybe, it's a half-mile away, a site you never thought of, but it makes perfect sense in that moment. Right. And maybe there's construction or something too. You don't know. Like there's construction that happens, so you have to change things up. It's all in the moment. And what your evacuation. And John, you can get to the point where you can send people to the exact door of a building that they need to go in. So imagine then you have school staff and maybe police there ahead of time, so you have the exact door where people are supposed to be coming in. Again, versus like show up at this location, which might be City Hall, versus showing up and we talk, it's crazy. And so it's a free app, but it's also going to be integrated into phones. It's not one of these fly by night things. This is integrated. This is now part of it's integrated into United Nations disaster plan. What this means for schools though is you can wipe that whole section out of your binder.
You can rip that thing out of your binder and just throw that in the garbage where it belongs. Yeah.
Throw it in the garbage where it belongs, and it's gone. And you're working the problem, and it is so much more efficient. But I'll go and I'll tell people this, and they kind of get it, but they still want to see it in the bind. They still are so convinced, like they have to have this actual physical site, and it has to be there. And I'm like, no, you have to let go. That's so hard for educators and parents, but this is the way of the future. This is the way it has to go. And I've got a really cool story about a scenario involving a drone. If you want to.
Oh yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. So I teach different school administrator classes. So I am a licensed superintendent and special ed director, and have functioned in all different capacities in school management. But also as a professor, I put together a case study in the past year. And the case study was for a school administrator. Okay, you are at a building, elementary school building, and whether you're the superintendent or the principal, whatever, but you're the leading person at that building. Somebody comes up to you and says, "We've just lost Thomas. Thomas is gone." And so Thomas is a boy with autism, and he's wandered from the building. This actually happens more frequently than is reported. I have a friend who has a search and rescue dog, and she indicated several times in the last year in Wisconsin and Michigan when she was called out for students who would either wander from a school during the school day or after school activity, or also like from home. But people do this at nursing homes too.
Yeah. Actually, anyway, the nursing home things happens a lot. We see it on the news here. But anyway,
yeah, happens. So let's say that a neighbor comes over. So this was the scenario I presented to these school administrators who are actually school administrators. I mean, right there, we're in the classroom. We said, okay, here's the scenario. It's unfolding. A neighbor comes over and says, I have this drone and I can get this thing up in the air in 1 minute, and I can start as infrared. I can be a part of this rescue, and I can help you find whoever you're looking for. And I'm like, do you do it? Do you let this person engage in your rescue? And out of 18 people, 9 people said yes, 9 people said no. Okay. So tell me. So why do you think people would say no to that?
I think they would say because they're not in a position of appointed authority.
Yeah, you're right. They would say, I don't have the discretion to make that decision. And if I make this and it's not the right decision or something goes wrong, I could lose my job. So they're thinking of that. And the other part is they're thinking, well, what if this person ends up, scaring this kid and chasing them away further. And they start going through this rabbit hole of negative things. Like this, we can't do this. I got to shut it down. Not part of the plan. It's not part of the plan. Well, again, like the harbor rescue on 9/11 was part of the plan. So anyway, so how about these people again? And these are people who, after that class, they go back and the next day they're the actual principal in their elementary building. How about the people that said yes? What do you think their justification was?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know. Tell me. I don't know.
Okay. And first of all, how I presented this is I made people write it down on a piece of paper. So it wasn't like they could kind of like raise hands and see who else was raising their hand.
Right. So there was no peer pressure on your answer. Yeah.
Right. So what people said is, listen, if any resource available to me in the moment, I am going to put to use. And so I'm going to get a description of this kid, and if they can get out there with this drone and they can locate where that student is at, yes, like absolutely, I'm going to use that resource. And also here's the second part. I believe that my superior and my school board has my back, that if this wasn't the right move, they'll say, well, that, whatever, David made that decision in the moment. Everything is laminated to context and situation. As an expert witness, I always go back to that. It's you can't judge something 5 years ago versus like how things might play out today. I mean, things today, you have different technologies, different whatever, but in that moment, I have that resource available to me. I am going to use it, and my board or my superior is going to have my back. So that's the big thing. And a lot of these schools right now, a lot of the principals, the school boards, and teachers, they won't make decisions, or they'll decide no because they don't believe people have their back. And so I'll go to districts, and when I consult, I'll say, you need to tell people you have their back to use their discretion in a crisis. Like if they make a decision and it turns out horribly wrong, which hopefully it doesn't, but if they make a decision based upon their training, what's happening in the moment that is in their best interest and the best interest of their students, that you have their back. You have to tell them that, because if you don't, they're going to freeze and they're likely not going to do anything, or they're going to stick to this script you have, which instantly, once it has 17 steps and you've got to step 2 and you're already way off base of what's really happening. And they're just going to keep playing that disaster scenario out. So it's amazing, these discussions. But yeah, 9 people yes, 9 people no. And it's like, if it's not part of our plan, Dave, I'm not doing it because I'm not going to take the heat. Wow.
Well, you had me on your podcast. You were kind enough to have me, and we talked about a variety of issues. I think everything from school safety to the Cleveland Indians and 80s movie, which was a lot of fun, by the way. Check that interview out. I think we had a lot of fun.
I love that interview. Yeah.
Bob Uecker. Anyway, but I think that part of this, I fancy myself an amateur historian. You've ever heard the expression that, whenever there's a war, people are fighting the last war?
Yes.
Everybody knows a famous example of the blunder of the Maginot Line, the French against the Germans,
right.
Because they were thinking static warfare, World War I, whatever. They had no concept of, mechanized infantries, where they could move quickly and just go around them. The whole, the French had spent, I don't know how many, billions of francs building this fortification. And I don't know what, the war was over in an afternoon or something.
Right. They went through the forest in Belgium and they were okay, so yeah.
So people have that, that mindset and I think that's one of the, like we were saying, it kind of started with Columbine. So people are thinking about that. And then another thing happens. And then they're thinking about that. They're not, kind of like you said, people need to be dynamic in their thinking in the moment. And if you take that away from them because they're always worried about, I'm going to get in trouble because I didn't follow this checklist or flow chart or whatever, instead of saying, look, I know what needs to be done, I'm doing it. That's the real thing, would you say?
Yeah, completely. And also with, for example, with students, and reporting threats. One thing I'll do when I consult with schools is I always ask to meet with students in focus groups. So like 4 to 8 students, and we'll talk about, what makes your school safe and what do you perceive doesn't make it safe? If somebody started here, well, how would you help them to understand the ropes of safety in your school, stuff like that. But a question I'll ask is, they'll say like, well, we have this app or whatever of how to report a threat. I'm like, oh, show me how to do it. And then like demonstrate it for me. Like most can't. So
I never opened it before.
No, honestly, and I sat next to a school police liaison, and it was a middle school student, and they said, Darren, take the phone out and show him. So Darren takes the phone out and he gets to the app because all the students are required to download the app. And then Darren's like, okay, so now what? Well, yeah, remember we practiced this during the assembly? Like you go here to here to here to here to here and then here. And I mean, it was like Darren's like, I don't know, like, you know, and it's mind boggling. People think the more sophisticated you go with these systems, the better they are. But actually, they get horribly difficult to interface with. And now you take students with disabilities, 10 million students with disabilities, English language learners, and you try to have them interface with that complexity of app. It's really, and these apps have never been trialed with students and also students with disabilities in the first place. A crazy story. I was with a Wisconsin School for the Blind, and they were looking at a school safety app, checking out school safety app. This was like a month ago. Wisconsin School for the Blind. So I take this one app which looks promising, and a couple students are trying it out, and they're saying the problem is like it doesn't have what's called a voice overlay option, which like iPads have, where it'll read everything that's on the screen to you. It's kind of standard technology, and a lot of new programs and things like that. But anyway, it didn't have that, so it was all visual based. So I went back to the vendor and I said, yeah, I shared this with students who are blind, and they said they couldn't access it. And the vendor, without pausing, said, got a solution for it. You can magnify the screen.
Oh my God. Is that real? Did he really say that?
Completely.
I don't know whether to laugh or cry.
And I, of course, I'm like, yeah, not a cure for blindness. I'm asking for how to make this, interface, and just left it at that point. But honestly, because these are people who are given a script. I'm somebody who knows this organically. I know the research. I can come in and really help you out without ever having to spend $1. I mean, really. I think at some point we should, maybe talk about like Sir Baden-Powell and the like Kim's Game and stuff like that, which do wonders for helping, kids with environmental awareness and stuff like that. But yeah, it's absolutely insane to have vendors, selling these things and have no idea. I mean, once they make the sale, that's it. That's good. And it's absolutely horrible. And these things will become obsolete. Nobody knows if they really work. I have that in my PBS presentation of something in Wisconsin, a product that a high school student invented, and then the school district bought over $5,000 worth of his product. And I'm like, well, it didn't go through any, underwriter laboratory trials or it might be great. But I'm like, a student creates this and your district then buys it for every classroom. And it's really a weird scenario that just tells you how fast. If I wanted to make money hand over fist, I would just have to rebadge myself with some vendor and some Igloo or whatever. And man, I would be set.
Yeah, I mean, if you weren't retired, well, like we said at the beginning of the program, you wouldn't have written the book. At least you wouldn't have written it the way you wrote it, with this kind of brutal honesty and accuracy. And you certainly wouldn't be saying the things that you're saying now on this live stream, because, like you said, it's a business. So people are not. I mean, it's sad to say, but they're putting profits before security. And by security, we mean saving lives. And now I'm not saying that these people are mercenary or Machiavellian, but it's just the way the way things are.
Yeah. And a good example is, someone who is selling you those metal bollards that you can drill down into your sidewalk, but then not asking, hey, how are your two-way radios? Because really, like, your two-way radios are important for a lot of reasons. Maybe a student, has had a medical event on a playground. You can communicate back and forth with your, teachers if you have to move resources because of student with a, behavioral need or something like that. I mean, there's many reasons why you should have a robust communication system versus this. But no, they're not going to ask that. Like, have you gone through that whole prioritization? They are there to sell you that. And
because the pylons are, they're big, large, I think ugly things. But they're people could say, "Look what we've done," and you could take a photograph of it, make a flow chart, and
it is completely. Let's look at what we've done, and I keep going back to that in one part because I'm a bicyclist, and those.
Do you want to tell the story about the cyclist?
Yeah. So
tell that story.
Pete Medic is Medek, is a bicyclist in Ohio, and he writes a Trailways blog, and has also been instrumental in having Ohio remove several of these bollards from bike paths because bicyclists are running into them and being maimed or killed. And a lot of this actually never gets reported. Like it's just a bicyclist accident, but it's not that they've hit this. And the reason is it's very difficult to, first of all, when they put one or two of these to navigate, to identify how much space you have on either side when you're closing in on them. And if somebody's in front of you and they suddenly swerve, you don't have reaction time, so you run into it. And it's not just bicyclists, it's cross-country runners who are coming around a corner and there's a bollard and they slam into it and it kills them. So this is it's intense and it's crazy. And as Pete said, if you take the trail and you pass 30 of these things and you come back, you're passing those 30 bollards again. And now you add night in. And again, the whole, and imagine now you have
and David, not just night, weather.
Right. Night and weather. And so one of the recommendations, and then try to remove these things. So it was a few $100s just to remove every one. So this massive cost. So one of the solutions was, okay, before every bollard, like 50 feet before, you'd have to put a sign, and then you'd also have to put some kind of paint down on the pavement indicating that bollard ahead or something like that. So I'm like, okay, now you've just introduced two more obstacles.
and compounded the problem.
Right. You're compounding the problem. And so I have a photo of this in my book, and it was my, it's a school that I go by most nights when I run. It's a few blocks from me, and they already had a portico out in front with big pillars, and it's a curved entrance, and they put these bollards in front through a safety grant. And nobody is ever going to attack that building. I don't even know how you could maneuver a car like to pull off this stunt to try to like absolutely hit this perfectly. But what it did is, if you're in a wheelchair, and wheelchairs are getting bigger, by the way, you'd have to perfectly aim down the center without scraping your knuckles on both sides of this thing. It's insane. And in winter, I'm going past this thing in winter in Wisconsin, and you can tell how do you shovel around these things? They're impossible to shovel around. Depending upon where the sun is, you get icy patches. You just knew it. You knew the custodians were like, great. Like, this is a nightmare. Your main entrance, right? Kids coming out at the end of the day, whoop, sliding and stuff like that. But it just was senseless. You put that money toward either improving your PA systems, your communication systems, working with focus groups of kids so you can hopefully get them to report threats that they know to go to an adult, or that you have some threat reporting system which is simplified. That would make a huge difference. Those would all be things on what's called a prioritization matrix. You're just comparing one thing to another. Is this more important than this? Is this more important than this? Gives you a list. But no, this is what you do, but it sticks out. You can see it right away. You go by, it's visible safety, right? And that's what people want to see. And taxpayers are on the hook for it. So it's so frustrating. I just clench my fist at this because it's senseless. And yet, like I was interviewed by the paper on the security measures that were taken, and of course, given the little protagonist paragraph and kind of dismissed then by somebody afterwards who has no experience really in this at all. And I'm like, well, that's the way it is. It's just kind of the way. But I wrote the book. The book is solid. I mean, if you go through it, it's entertaining. I mean, these stories of...
I got to say, it is funny.
There are things that there's, and not to reveal anything, but I mean, Katie Pashon of Cajun Navy Relief is mentioned in the book. And Katie was in her 20s, and she was pressed into service to work this communication system to basically connect boaters with the Cajun Navy volunteer boaters, with people who needed rescues. And she's like, I learned this overnight. I didn't have any training. And now she's doing it with a company or an organization, Triton Relief, which is a 501 C3 or C3 or whatever the hell that is, a nonprofit. And she's doing that. And they're these amazing people. But yeah, see that story. Yeah, story like I was, firefighting once, and I wasn't at all thinking that's the way the day was going to turn out for me when I got up that morning. But so there's a lot of stories. When I wrote the book, I kept telling my member checks, I need this to have very relatable portions for parents, so they can say, yeah, I know, okay, the bagel, that makes sense to me. Every day is kind of the same, and there's going to be days when things are really out there. Like 9/11 was a day like you're way outside your bagel, but eventually, like, you'll come back to a bagel. Things will kind of come back to a sense of similarity, not necessarily like a normal. Like but you'll be in a new routine. Like after 9/11, 2 weeks after 9/11, the NFL started playing again. Green Bay Packers hosted the Redskins on Monday Night Football. So things kind of work back, and that's the same thing in life. I was in a car accident January 18th, and a really severe car accident. And I was in the middle of it. It was on the interstate, multi-vehicle accident, and it started to unfold ahead of me. And I knew it was going to happen. And in that moment, I just recognized my Torus is changing. Like, this car's toast. This car's done. Hopefully I survive this. And it just all happened. I escaped serious injury, although I was pretty significantly injured for an amount of time. By the way, the picture in the book of me was taken 3 days after that. And
You look pretty good.
The photography did all of the touch-up.
Is that all Photoshop then?
Yeah. I look like I just got out of a fight with Mike Tyson. Like, my face is cut up and bruised, and I'm like, it had to happen. It was already scheduled. So just kind of a little bit of irony as you're looking like at in the book. It has my picture, but I knew, like, I accepted it. I came home, I wrote down what happened, got with my insurance company and all of that. The next day I already had a vehicle to replace, because I knew I needed a vehicle, and I just got back out of chaos into the Torus. And I really believe the work that I did, and I believe that book helped me deal with that in a very fast manner, and psychologically helped me return to a very good place very fast. And that's something too that people linger if they don't understand, if they're outside of their Torus, if they're in chaos. You can definitely identify when you're going into chaos. So that's it. The book will help you. The book will give you very clear examples of that, whether it be Katie Pachon talking about Cajun Navy, if a hurricane hits and your house is flooding out and you have to leave, or, one of my stories, they're in there. 9/11 example, if you're working.
Actually, I just want to say, one of the things I enjoyed most about the book were these anecdotes, because bring the human element of it. It makes you get it, like, on a larger level. Like, someone could say something like, I always, Joseph Campbell had this idea of like the layers of truth. Like, somebody could say, be kind to your neighbors, but you say, okay, yeah, I get it. But then if he tells, the parable of the Good Samaritan, you go like, oh, now I really get it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And I do. And the book originally was going to be titled Lessons of Lower Manhattan, because I do use the 9/11 example throughout the book, and kind of weave back into that, and then, got renamed School of Errors. And School of Errors is actually a play off of Comedy of Errors with Shakespeare, where just, so it does follow where we override our common sense right now in school safety to do a lot of things that are completely illogical, but just become vetted. And once things get vetted, but yeah, I want to thank, also, so Kevin, Ann Sturzinger absolutely made the book with the edge.
Okay, let's do that now, because we're going to have to wrap up, because I've kept a lot. We've gone for like an hour 40. Yeah. I could talk to you all night, but we will have to wrap it up. So I'd like to do this. I'd like you first, if okay, to thank the people, to acknowledge the people that you helped you put this fantastic book together. So let's start with that.
Yeah, Ann Sturzinger, definitely brought the edge, brought the skepticism. I'm an insider to this, so I needed someone who could see this from a completely different vantage point. And she is so talented, and would say, "Here, let's be very blunt on the professional standards of learning that are put out there by educators for how they're teaching administrators. That it's all garbage and fluff, like it doesn't teach anything. So let's like hammer that point home." And
yeah, Anne is. I know Anne a little bit, and yeah, blunt is one way to describe her. Yeah,
so we needed to work that balance of me being almost, because as a consultant, I also need to be a people pleaser, and to work that where this book needed to be what people needed to hear and not what they wanted to hear, and brought that to the book. Dr. Paul Rapp, head of military medicine, for as busy as he is, he made time for me, got back to me, was connecting me with incredible resources on chaos. So Paul, Dr. Sean Dickers, he is a professor at Bethel University, has worked with many multiplayer video games, and analyzed in the book. There was a section where I talked about the military and Homeland Security came out with a video game to,
oh yeah.
yeah, so teachers could practice what it would be like to be an active shooter. So, and Sean analyzed that and gave some different perspectives. And I talked about Katie Pashon, also Kevin Sullivan. So Kevin Sullivan is an Iraq war veteran, and he's about our age. And Kevin gave this phenomenal account of when he was on a runway on a tarmac in Iraq, and the shelling started. And and he's thinking, did somebody just back into a dumpster? What's happening? Where do I go? Do I get out my pistol? What am I going to shoot at? Do I? Oh wait, I got to go back to the plane. That's where my crew is. So he just you get inside of his mind. He lays this out, and that's what chaos is.
Yeah, war. I mean, what is more chaotic than war, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the definition of chaos in my mind. But anyway, keep going.
Oh yeah, so Kevin, shared that perspective, which was when you read it, I think it will help you as a parent or as an administrator, saying, yeah, when this actually happens, this is what it's going to be like. It's going to be like left and right, and here's a flash of light, and here's a sound, and whatever.
Yeah, and just so people know, this might be a spoiler. You won't have time to pull out that binder.
No.
Okay, just so you know.
No. Right. And one of my and as Attorney James Sibley was reading the book as a member check, one of the things he shared with me was, you get to a certain point in the book, and it's a little bit like reading Tuesdays with Maury. Like, when I was reading Tuesdays with Maury, I'm like, oh no, there's not enough pages left for this to have a good ending. Like, Maury's going to die at the end. And he said, you got to a certain point, when he was reading my book, he said, I got to a point, but it was different. Like, I knew you weren't going to suddenly unveil, here's your solution, everybody. And I appreciated that. He said it was a book to really make me think and look inside for the answers versus looking externally of, like, again, all of these grants being shoveled at people and all of that stuff. So that was really fascinating to hear him say that.
That's really true. I didn't articulate it that way to myself, but that's the feeling that I had too when I read it. But please keep going.
Oh yeah. So I mean, just those are really the fundamental people. I mean, so many throughout the safety community, anybody I would go to and pose questions, even with this PBS presentation, which is taking a lot of time. I got it done, but I would contact somebody and I'd say, I need a statistic on whatever. And literally in an hour, like, they would have it back. They'd have the site, they'd have an image of whatever it was. Right. I'd do a present. I'd go through a few slides and I'd rehearse it and say, hey, like, I posted on YouTube on a unlisted channel. Can you just look at this and tell me if it makes sense? Like, people are so accommodating. The city of New York, my God, the city of New York, John, they assigned me one person to work with on getting maps and data and everything. And they were just like through the top excited and cooperative to be working with me. I'm walking through my local Walmart at night on a Friday with my family shopping. My phone rings. It's Yvette from the planning department. She said, "Hey, Dave, I think I found this map that you're looking for in a JPEG image from 2005. I'm
So
going to
I
email."
want him to restate this. I'm a New Yorker. I'm from New York. The reputation that we have as mean people is a lie. Will you agree with that?
I will. This was incredible. The cooperation, and the dedication. And I mean, who does this? So I'm like, it's like 8, so it's like 10 by where she's at, and she's just going through files. But New York was absolutely wonderful to work with, and I had to fill out numerous forms, and actually they were very well laid out, like very concise and getting back to me. And everything was ahead of time too. It was like, here's when we think we'll have this to you, and they would get it to me like 5 days before even that date.
Wow.
But I'll never forget walking through and the phone rings and it's Yvette, and she said, "Yeah, I'm going to send you this image." And I mean, I just literally had an image, and I from an article or something. I'm like, I have no idea. And she's like, "I'm pretty sure I can match this up." And she did. So they're wonderful people out there. And but this whole trajectory we're on with spending for school safety it's insane. It's unsustainable. It's not producing results. That's what I ask people. Are we getting safer? And we're not, because we're not addressing threat reporting. And that is really what we need to do is put a lot into threat prevention, threat reporting. You'll never fortify your way to safety, because kids will always have to walk outside the fortification at some point. They walk home, they get on the bus, something. And what are you teaching them? I mean, what are you teaching them? How are you teaching them to interact with their environment? When they get to 19, 20 years and they go to a trip somewhere, reconnaissance. We know the value, the importance of reconnaissance. They're afraid.
Well, you're robbing them of their agency, is how I kind of view it. After reading the book, was that you're removing people's natural inclination to be ultimately responsible for their own survival, and telling them that someone else is going to be responsible for you. That is not a healthy way to raise a child. I mean, ultimately, as a child grows, that's why you're a parent. Like when you have an infant, they're completely dependent on their parents, and as they get older, this is why you slowly give children more and more responsibility, so they'll become a functioning adult. If they never have responsibility, how can they become adults and God forbid, parents?
Yeah, John, you've hit the nail on the head. And there's a FEMA. I know we're going a little bit long, but I want to just hit a couple things. There's a FEMA program called FEMA Teen, as in teenager, TEEN CERT, CERT, FEMA Teen CERT. And FEMA Teen CERT is a program, and schools can have their students go through this if they're age like 13 or older. It's wonderful. You go through it, and they teach you different ways to just handle yourself and interface during safety situations. It could be like, let's say a tornado came through, like how might you interface with responders on a search? And they actually have you do things like cribbing. Let's say a car tipped over, and how might you use pieces of wood to stabilize it? Stuff like this, which is amazing. How to use, obviously, like a fire extinguisher to put out a fire. But and then, if there are emergency responders coming in for anything, or let's say a lost child, it's not intruder stuff. Like everybody's like intruder. There's all kinds of disasters. But how might you render first aid? How might you keep people calm? And these kids love this. And so you just go to Teen Cert. They've got some videos. And this is starting to pick up momentum now in the country. But again, if you have these parents like outside of Cleveland, Ohio, who aren't going to let their 8th graders go to DC, they're certainly not going to do this. They're not going to let their kids put a piece of wood, under a
under a car that's flipped over,
a car that's flipped over or something like that. But I'm thinking to myself, my God, I want to be there. Like, I want to do this. Like, I want to be next in line. Like, kid, hey, move over. Like, let the safety doc here. I've earned it. I've earned my stripes. So, but this is what engages kids. Like, that will totally fascinate kids. Not some survey of saying how in the last 12 months, how many days did you not
That's in the
feel like
book
you were
too.
going
When you
to
did
school?
12 months.
Oh my God, I hate that youth risk behavior survey. And people will defend that thing. It's like Indiana Jones and you're going to, get the chalice or whatever. I mean, it's like people will defend that thing like it's the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm like, this is so statistically flawed. And I'm a statistician. I know this. Like, you can't tell me otherwise. Like, I can break this down and point out the flaws, and they're just like, I don't want to see it. Like, this works. I'm like, how does it work to do a survey of your high school and 11% of your kids feel that they're suicidal? And how does that help you versus like knowing the kids who are suicidal? Like, I just don't get the logic on that. And then I just try to do this blanket approach of like, we'll fix everyone. Well, you can't. And the last thing, and earlier today, I'm on the phone with a superintendent up in northern Wisconsin because I'm doing this PBS presentation. And I was kind of looking and said, ooh, like in Wisconsin, you draw a line right across the middle of the state. And in the northern part of the state, you have 39 child psychiatrists. In the bottom part of the state, you have 144. And in the bottom part of the state, it takes weeks to get an appointment. In the northern part of the state, it takes 7 months on average. And plus, like, you're driving in snow and all of that stuff, horrible roads and stuff. And I'm like, this is a big problem. So even if you have like these mental health systems, which they put the grants out there for, there's nobody to provide the services. So again, look internal. You have many internal experts. Kids are great. Kids can do this stuff. The teen cert, 8 years old, 100 years ago, kids going, 6 miles one way to the fishing hole through the woods. Hey, there's some logs down. You got to figure out, are you going to jump over them? You're going to walk around them. What are you going to do? It gets muddy, it gets stormy out watching the weather. We've taken all this from kids, John. I mean, it's so frustrating, but it's the book is hope. The book is the equivalent of Lawrence Kuchner, PhD out of Harvard, did Grand Theft Childhood back when video games were being blamed for shootings and violence. And they were subpoenaing the subpoenas for video game makers. And also like Dee Snider from Twisted Sister coming in, and rock music is causing all this. He came out with the book and said, garbage. Like, here's a meta-analysis, other studies showing this doesn't, just because like you're a deer hunter doesn't mean you're going to go out and kill everybody. If that was the case in Wisconsin, we'd all be doomed.
Right. There'd be no one left, right?
And I'm hoping my book has that same impact. I'm hoping people listening are compelled, go out on whatever, Amazon, it's like $30 and you can get, it's like $28.50 in an ebook version. It's well worth it. I put a lot of time into this book. It is, and you're just going to be better at life. Honestly, you're going to be better at handling life. If a parent passes away, if you're in a car accident, if something you deal with, a sudden loss of a job, anything like that, all of this is going to apply. Anything, happens, a storm hits your area, roof gets ripped off your house, this is so applicable. And
that's a powerful point, because when I was reading the book, I was so locked into the safety aspect of it, specifically school safety. I wasn't thinking, but you're so right that it does address all that, the unknowable, the quote unquote X factor of, which ultimately, what is life but a giant X factor, for God's sake, right? So it really does address that, helping you deal with that, the unknowable, that was a good insight.
Yeah. So, well, I am so thankful to be on your show and to be able to give this message. And on July 3rd, I'll be on PBS, 7 p.m. Central Time, doing a 55-minute presentation on school safety in America, rhetoric versus reality, and a lot of stuff. And actually, I'm identifying the top threat to school safety, which I can tell you nobody in the audience is going to, that will be like, oh my goodness, like what did he just say? Because there are some things that are emerging just in the last 6 weeks that are game changers, and we've really got to get on top of this, not only for kids but for ourselves. So that's
could you do me a favor, and can you plug your website and your Twitter so people can follow?
Yeah.
Yeah,
please.
I had Boomer Tech with the issues here. All the links to his book, both the Amazon, the Barnes, they're not in there now because I had Boomer Tech issues, but they will be. Anybody listening to this, a half hour from now, all the links to everything will be in there. But just please say your website and your Twitter.
Yeah. The website is safetyphd.com. And my Twitter handle is at safetyphd. And I would appreciate it if you follow on Twitter. I do the Safety Doc podcast. So we're over 100 episodes. I write those, I produce them. I have people like, you've been on, attorney, James Sibley, have just different people, discussions, firefighters, people who drive tow trucks, things like that. We come on and have discussions about safety. Pretty fun stuff.
Yeah, I can attest to that. I was on it, so thank you so much.
You learn. So yeah, and if you subscribe on there, also the YouTube channel, I'm starting to get more follows. But I produce the show. I write a little blog post too. And if over time people will email me, from different parts of the country, and I was one of the first people to come out right after the Notre Dame fire and say that 500,000 pounds of lead that's just been vaporized at 700 degrees, that's going to cause this toxic, mess in Paris. So I did a podcast right away on that and got that out. And yeah, a couple of weeks later, BBC and other sources are starting to report, high levels of lead in people. I'm like, yeah, obviously, because I saw it, I know this. So it's follow me, please. I'm not a vendor. I'm not selling you anything. The book, for $30, my goodness, it's a great investment in your.
Yeah, you don't get much for $30 anymore in 2019.
No, it really is. And I would say I'm one of the good guys, and I work with a crew of the Incredibles, some really great people in school safety and safety, like Rory Miller, really people on the right side of this. But it's hard. I'm telling you, it is hard to compete right now when the vendors are just out there and the money is hand over fist. So please take the book and talk sense into as many people as you can. We don't have to go down this route.
Right. So we're going to end it on that uplifting note. I want to thank you again so much, David, for being on. It was a pleasure, as always, talking to you. You are a brilliant, kind, and insightful man.
I appreciate that. And John, always a pleasure to interact with you. And I appreciate listening to your shows and what you bring to your audience. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.